Hello, welcome
Hello.
to the 10th episode, Martin, of It's Your Time You're Wasting. How about that? Show?
A decade almost.
Well, a few weeks.
Doesn't quite
work.
It
feels like a decade, Martin. It does.
Have you enjoyed half term?
I really have enjoyed half term for the first time in many, many years. It's felt like a half term because I was absolutely knackered, and now I feel reinvigorated and raring to go.
Raring to go back.
Oh yes.
And I expect everyone, all the children are dying to get back into school. I should think
they can't wait. If my children are anything to go by,
they've had enough of being back at home. It's sort of a mini reminder of what lockdown was like with your parents.
Yeah. What, half term?
Yeah, half term holiday. You know that glimpse,
yes,
memory. You see.
Happy day. So, Martin, there's a lot been going on this week. One of the things that's been made it escapes from the boundaries of social media almost into the mainstream is the kerfuffle around exclusions.
Yeah, there's a group, No More Exclusions, and I've got a press release from them, and they said that. Sorry, I'll just take a quote from here. No More Exclusions stands against sexual violence and all forms of violence. Some of us are survivors of sexual violence ourselves, and we stand in solidarity with all survivors of sexual violence. But they were talking about not excluding people. I mean, at any point. So I think the argument started when someone raised the point that what about a child who's committed sexual violence in a class, in a school, and should they stay in the school? And people were saying yes, and a lot of teachers were saying no, should not happen. They should not be allowed to be in the same school as a victim. And then other people were saying, well, if you separate them from victims or you use certain restorative justice discussions, perhaps that will sort everything out. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because I think this all started with last week's guest, Andrew Oles, talking about the fact that look at the No More Exclusions own materials seem to suggest that there were some problems with that, and so. What do they say? They say in their own materials abuse is about power, and it's also important to address abuse by adults towards young people in schools and other institutions. Well, that sounds odious and grim, so it would be. As children, we are taught not just to accept the authority of adults, and this can lead us to learn to ignore our own sense of discomfort. Maybe by creating a culture of consent, not just among students, but also between students to staff, we both allow young people to have their agency and also make them less likely to want to transgress someone else's boundaries, encouraging people to respect each other and hold themselves to account. By contrast, in environments in which their consent is constantly violated, young people might wonder, why should I care about someone else's boundaries if mine are always being transgressed? And there's an implication here, isn't there, that it's schools' fault. If there's violence, if there's sexual violence in schools, it's because schools are transgressing young people's boundaries and forcing them into being sexual predators. I don't know what we can make of that.
Well, first of all, would we all agree that it would be a great world if there were no exclusions at all?
Well, not necessarily, no. I think it would be a great world if there were no need for exclusion.
That's what I mean. If there were no need for exclusions, wouldn't that be a good thing? Now, the point is, are there some recidivists out there? Children I had a head teacher who used to say, you've got to get the recidivists. So he aimed for those, you see. Now, I myself sort of ended school before my time, shall we say.
Me too.
And so, well, exactly. And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I do think it does make a difference to a child if they don't finish school when they perhaps could have done. And I felt let down by the school then, very much so. And, you know, in the years that went up to that. So I think schools, certainly when I was younger, didn't do much about stopping kids. But now I think that schools do quite a lot to try and change a child's life around. They don't just sort of say, naughty child, chuck them out. And schools have counsellors, or should have counsellors, certainly. And obviously connections to mental health services, but again, perhaps not as good as it could be. But I don't think schools go there just throwing kids out willy-nilly. I think they take a very, very grim view of it if they have to go ahead with it.
I think that there are very few people involved in education that wouldn't see excluding students permanently as an absolute last resort. There might be one or two unpleasant ne'er-do-wells who delight in excluding children, but I think they're very much in a minority if they exist at all. That nobody wants to exclude children, but what's more important? Maybe we have to ask ourselves the well-being of the victim or the culprit, and if it comes down to, especially when it comes down to a situation like sexual violence, are we expecting young people who've been victims of sexual violence to have a restorative conversation with their attackers and for all to be well? And is that reasonable? Is that fair? Is that the sort of thing? Is that the sort of society we want to create anywhere, especially for schools?
I mean, it is a difficult one. I mean, even if you go to primary age kids, I mean, where do you draw the line on these things, and what do you say is sexual assault, sexual violence, and all these? Where do you draw the line? But even sort of more usual things like bullying, you know, whatever you call it, for a parent to have their kid sort of fear to go to school every day because the bully is there, to be known about, but to remain at the school and just to sort of glare at them across the playground or something like that would be awful, I think. And yet it does happen quite a lot, that a lot of kids find themselves bullied at school, finding it very difficult to express themselves, especially when they're younger, about that bullying. And from a parental perspective, I think it's an abhorrent thing to have bullies sort of allowed to stay at school, perhaps with various conversations. But, you know, as a parent, I'd want them out straight away.
Well, yes, maybe we wouldn't want that if it was our children, but you know, that's a more difficult discussion to have, isn't it? So these children tend to be somebody's sons and daughters, and so you know that's always going to be a highly emotive issue. But I think perhaps, Martin, you and I can agree that in a perfect world where all children behaved wonderfully, there would be no exclusions. We're not in that world, and therefore exclusions are perhaps it's the last line of defence. It's the only thing schools can really do. Every other sort of attempt at discipline in schools is, as Catherine Burble-Singh, I think, was talking about in her interview with us last week, that it's a polite fiction that students do what their teachers say. The only reason they do is because they choose to, and if they choose not to, there's not really a lot we can do about it. And that's of course that's a big problem, and I think it's probably fair to say that rather than that being the responsibility of schools, that's a societal responsibility. If there are some children whose behaviour is so outre and extreme that they can't be accommodated in mainstream education, then some kind of alternative is needed. And obviously the as humane a possible option is exactly what I think everybody would want. But while we wait for that option, we need to make schools as safe as possible for as many students as possible.
Should MATs, all MATs be implored to have an exclusion unit, you know, with the idea of taking people out of mainstream, perhaps even bringing them back into mainstream at some point for some kids?
Absolutely. And I think that's certainly something that Multi-Academy Trust should be doing, if they're not already doing. Many, I think, probably are. I think a lot of schools these days have areas of the school or buildings within the school where they try to put students as a sort of last stopgap, so they don't want to get rid of them entirely. They try and keep them out of mainstream circulation, but on site in some way as far as is possible. And yeah, I think that all schools would try with that kind of scenario to get young people back into classrooms if it's safe and reasonable to do so. It's only when it isn't that the uncomfortable and unpleasant decision has to be made.
Yeah. Hey ho. Well, no more exclusions, they say. They've highlighted that exclusions are an ineffective tool to deal with all forms of violence. The forceful removal of children from their education through exclusions can only cause further harm and violence in the future. Well, not necessarily, but I see where that's coming from. But perhaps overall, I did invite them to come along, see if they could bring someone along to talk to us, but I haven't received a reply yet. But if they would like to get in touch, then
that would be great. It'd be really interesting, wouldn't it, to hear from someone who could shed a bit of light on some of those things. Anyway, look, this is all a bit of a downer to start our 10th episode, Martin. It is. What we wanted to do, what we're hoping to do. I know. I'm sorry. We're wanting to celebrate a little bit of the 9 episodes we've had to date. So we've put together a little bit of a show reel, and we're going to start off by, we've had various people talking to us about different elements of culture and what we might describe as the culture wars.
It's just really exciting to be part of that team, and that's why we bring everybody together with our singing and our chanting. We choose "I Vow to Thee, My Country, God Save the Queen and Jerusalem," because these are songs of our country. And we believe, as I said, we like the Queen. And the reason for that, I mean, look, it's not like I'm some royalist. I don't have plates with the Queen's face on it and all of that. In fact, I've only just started watching The Crown just recently, like 3 weeks ago or something, the series 1. And that was only because I so happened to just get Netflix. I hadn't had Netflix before, so I'd never watched it. And all of my senior team kept saying, "You've got to see The Crown, Catherine, you've got to see The Crown." And so I have to say I do love it. But if I was obsessed with royalty, I would have watched the first series when it first came out. But the reason why it works really well in terms of culture for a school is that you've got to have a kind of hierarchy. So the children have their teachers who are in charge of them. And then there are heads of department, there are heads of year, there's your middle management. And then you've got your deputy heads and assistant heads, and those are your senior management. And then you've got the head teacher at the top. And what's really good is when it doesn't just stop with me. I can point above me and say, "And there is the Queen." And so when we say, be like the Queen, we want to behave with tea. And that's why it's so important that the royal family, the members of the royal family should behave with dignity.
I just look at the stats. Everything we do should be evidence informed. And I look at the information we have, from the DFE or from ONS that suggests that, for example, Black African kids are exceeding all throughout primary school, all throughout secondary school, and twice as likely to go to university than white British kids. So again, the race issue isn't so much there, but when we look at white working class boys, we see that the class does play an issue and that people are being held down from a working class background. So maybe there are some things we need to work on around class, much more than we need to work on around race.
As teachers, I think we're really good at being balanced. And I know teachers on Twitter, I agree with some and disagree with others, but generally I think we all have the same point of view that we should be teaching a range of views, but they have to reflect what is appropriate, I think. But that we can unpick that for hours, can't we, about what is appropriate. So I would say if there's children in a school need to know that they are okay, that whatever they fit, and as long as they're not being illegal, being sexist or racist, or any of those protected characteristics, that's what we have to teach. Then, but equally, we need to make people feel welcome. So that's what, if you've got children that feel that they're wrong because of what they're being taught, that's an issue, isn't it?
As you say, it was a moral panic. Well, we have a similar moral panic now in terms of a social justice movement that is convinced that we live in a nation of fascists, racists, evil people. They believe that there is oppression absolutely everywhere, and in order to combat oppression and to prove that gender is a social construct, they should construct as many new genders as possible. So there's all these very sort of alarmist, irrational, I suppose at the heart of it, it's a lack of rational thought, which was the same as the moral panic with section 28. So what I'm doing is actually opposing the moral panic, not supporting one.
So the multicultural movement, I think, was misconceived. In the sense that it assumed that the culture of your ancestors, culture of your mother, father, grandparents, is something you can't throw off, that it's part of your essence. Well, that I call the racialization of culture, because it's turning it into something of your birth culture. It's ancestor worship. It's kind of considered something essential to you. But that birth culture is not any more essential than any other culture you pick up.
From me,
you've got the institutions of the working class, the trades union movement, the old WEA, the Workers' Education Association, the things like that, and sort of a tawny idea, of bathing in in knowledge as a great thing. Robert Tressel, all those people talking about education of the working class and the importance of that. And then we've also got popular culture and perhaps as part of the opium of the masses coming into it as well.
There's another view of that though, Martin. There are all kinds of opiums of the masses. And whilst one might have the sugary pop hit as an opium of the masses, one would also say that one can become incredibly literate through the study of decent lyricists. My path towards literacy was dominated more by Leonard Cohen than it was by any novelist. And to say that for me the idea of popular culture is, and why a Tory establishment at the moment wants to introduce a white canonical culture, is that popular culture is the one thing that they cannot control. Now, what do you get a social class that have already got everything? You get them more. And how do you get them more? You get them more by crushing dissent. And currently we have a situation where there are organizations expressing dissent about their conditions and as Varoufakis puts it, as the depraved inequalities in our society. And how is culture and it's a question rather than a statement. How is culture being used to crush that dissent? And the view of the book is that it is actively, though covertly, used to crush dissent. And that actually teachers need to see where these ideas come from and what's actually the kind of what's the founding idea behind them. And so clearly it's a kind of rebellious left-wing text, but I think there's a lot to rebel against at the moment.
So there we go. It's what
Miranda.
I loved about all these interviews is the wide range of opinions there are out there, and of course, as the human beings, they express a wide range of views, and so we should. But whether we reached any conclusions on all these things, I don't know. But we certainly opened up the debate.
Well, I hope so, and I think that the more time I spend with all of the different people involved in that great education debate, I think it's completely true that everybody wants essentially the same things. They want children to be liberated by education. They want children to be safe and happy, and they want them to be able to think critically and creatively, and all of this other stuff. There's nobody involved in education that doesn't want those things. It's just where the debate is how we get there, and that sparks some vociferous disagreements as we got a little glimpse of there. But
if everyone does want these same outcomes,
oh really?
I'm not entirely sure whether that's true. I think some people would prefer people to perhaps be politically more one way than the other, shall we say, just to put it politely.
Well, I couldn't possibly comment, Martin, but if anyone would like to come on the show and make the argument that they would like education be for being about indoctrinating children in one particular political viewpoint, we'd love to have you on to discuss that.
Well, I think that's kind of where some people are coming from. They particularly, but
I'll admit that, Martin.
Everyone thinks that. So even the sort of this sort of middle way about, oh, we want people to be critical thinkers and things like that. Well, that's an ideology in itself. Perhaps not in North Korea, but certainly over here. Perhaps it's reflective.
No, it's difficult, isn't it? When we talk about sort of allowing children to think for themselves, we don't want. Maybe there are people, but we don't tend to approve of children expressing sort of extreme right-wing views and saying that they're, actually that Hitler was a decent chap or anything like that. We don't want children having that much freedom, rightly, probably. But maybe you're right. Maybe there's been a narrowing there. But I think even despite that, people would say that's. Can we get rid of that graphic, please? I don't know what.
You could just peer out from behind. I should think.
Can we get rid of this as well? Oh my goodness. Okay, we're going to have somebody shot on me. Okay, so I can't remember what I was saying, but it was probably pretty tedious. Anyway, that. As well as all of that, there's that graphic that pops up inappropriately there. We just need to have a bit of a talk about some of the things that have been going on this week. And it was reported, Martin, in the US.
Sorry, this is serious.
It is serious. It is serious. An Ofsted inspector has caused the close down of a primary school by testing positive. What do we know about this?
I think he turned up and obviously, if an inspector turns up at school, they should keep some form of social distancing and all these other things. So I don't know how even if he was there and cuffed in a room, would it make everyone catch it? I don't know. What? How did it happen?
Well, so obviously he was. Had the virus. Didn't know that, I would imagine. Went to take part in the inspection visit, and then obviously alerted the school when he had a positive test to say this has been the case. And it's almost certainly the case that nobody was infected by him, although we don't know that. And so the school has been in touch with Public Health England and said, we've had an Ofsted inspector come and infect us, and they've said, shut the school. And I think really the debate is here.
Inspect or infect? There you go.
Ofsted. Pardon me?
Inspect or infect?
Yeah. Well, what is the role of Ofsted? Should they be self-isolating? Should they be working from home? Or should they be running the risk of making things worse by forcing schools to inadvertently, of course, to have to close their doors to students? And I think when you frame it in that way, it sounds pretty clear what they ought to be doing, doesn't it?
It gets to a point where, a number of visitors, if schools are open house, just anyone can come in, then obviously that is a risk. So there's got to be a point where external agencies have to be limited coming in. Consultants, for example, I wouldn't sort of encourage them coming into schools at the moment. And certainly you would want, perhaps if there's any work to be done on the school, perhaps it's done in school holidays or out of school hours.
Hard to know. Anyway, we've got the graphic that was put up. Let's have a look at that now. And the teacher leaves and they stay there. And there are other schools where the teachers are moving about, but the children leave the classroom, go outside, come back in, and have a brief hiatus in the middle. And it looks like that's probably a sounder option.
And also the windows open if you've got windows. That's the other thing. Of course, some classrooms don't have windows, or over the years they've made sure they can't open them very far. So the bars are in the way or whatever, or they haven't been opened for years. So what do you do there? But I certainly think allow kids to wear their coats come winter. Perhaps.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So it's already pretty chilly in some classrooms, let me tell you. So absolutely, I think we'll have to do that. We'll all have to wear thermal underwear, and we'll just have to get used to chillier teaching. But
I think the pictures on about the 1918-19 flu outbreak, and there were pictures of classes outdoors in New York with snow on the ground and all sort of dressed and huddled up like that. teeth
So
chattering.
we were hardier then, Martin.
You know, and perhaps that might be the way to go forward for some. You know, Forest School perhaps on mid-December.
Probably not.
No.
No, I don't think so. I think that's unlikely, Martin. I think we'll take the chance of just having the windows open where possible and not staying in classrooms for more than an hour. But, you know, it's a numbers game. It's a risk. And as you've probably seen, France, Germany are now locked down, but schools remain open. And that certainly looks, whatever else is happening, it certainly looks like there's very clear determination to keep schools open, come what may, as far as possible. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Oh, Martin, let's have a few more clips. And we've got another variety of clips which we've grouped together.
Well, I was going to say this is all about leadership. This is leadership decisions.
Yes, okay. So hard decisions made by leaders in the time of Corona. But here we have a variety of speakers talking about different aspects of leadership. Would it be true to say that within this moral purpose that there's perhaps, you know, that schools that are standing alone, the schools that are not part of trusts, who are very successful, do they have an obligation, perhaps, at some level to be part of a trust?
Yes, I think they do. I think they absolutely do. I think standalone academies are a really interesting part of our sector in the sense that they're allowed to be standalone because they've done really well. The challenge I think that they face is that all of the answers to how they've got to becoming great and how they are going to continue to be great exist within the boundaries of their school and the capacity that they've got in their body of staff, in their workforce. And I think unless you have a mechanism by which you continually challenge your own thinking and you continually work with others to reflect upon whether you're really as strong as you think you are, I think that's one of the reasons why standalone academies over time begin to see their performance dip.
Would it be true to...
I think certainly it's true that grammar schools now are dominated by middle classes still to a large extent. And there's various circumstances that I think in no way is that by design. I think that's by default because you have 163 grammar schools in the entire country, not regionally distributed. So geography determines it. And then when you've got geography, those people who are more affluent and have more resources will actually work the system better to get their children into them and also aspire to them. And that's a challenge for grammar schools to overcome that. And one way is by making the grammar schools more accessible to working class children. But that means those working class children have to pass a selective test in the first place to get into them, because you can't really get around that aspect. The other way, and I think that first way is great, and we've done a lot within the grammar school to improve our access in that respect by making pupil premium, for instance, a high priority. But the other way actually is by engaging with the other schools, the secondary moderns, and working with them in partnership, because there's absolutely no reason why the opportunities that are provided at the grammar school shouldn't be available to the students in the secondary modern. But to do that, you need a grammar school and a secondary modern not throwing stones at each other over the fence, but actually working together. And one way you do that is by setting up a trust with those two schools and putting a passionate working class boy in charge of it as the CEO to ensure that that's exactly what we're going to be doing.
Of course, education is not fair, and that's something that my trust exists to fight against. It's not fair that pupils who pay for their education get smaller class sizes. It's not fair that they have extended hours. It's not fair that you go to a school in an advantaged area and you have a different quality of education than in a disadvantaged area for all sorts of reasons that are not the fault of the people going to those schools. It's not fair that we have those things are not fair. Examinations aren't the route to mitigating that. The route to mitigating that is making schools better. And of course, during the pandemic, some of those things about the provision of education is even more unfair. It's really unfair that in some schools at the moment you have 40 or 50 or 60% of pupils at home self-isolating, learning online, which with the best will in the world and all the incredible things that teachers have done isn't as good as face-to-face. I don't think anybody would claim it is. Of course that's unfair, but that doesn't mean the examination should pretend that pupils know more than they do.
You've already said, about the type of reporting where, why don't you have anything better to do, to report? But clearly for local newspapers, sometimes even national newspapers, they report on this stuff because it gets views. It's people are interested in it. And I think one of the things that really surprises me, as somebody that reads a newspaper, I'm pretty supportive of schools following, having rules and following them. Why isn't that interesting, do you think? Why don't newspapers or the media want to tell those stories, that schools turning things around and having higher expectations? What do you think's gone wrong there?
I think what's gone wrong is the whole uniform aspect is seen to be controversial. You've got this poor family with this poor child that didn't know what the uniform policy was, clearly didn't go to the open week or open evening a year before they selected the school. They've not really considered the fact that parents have selected to go there. Obviously that child then, they don't report on the fact that that child would have engaged in a series of transition days in the summer term where behaviour and uniform expectations would have been explained to parents. All of the background communication that would have gone out to primary schools and to parents in general, none of that is considered. It's just the controversy of school kicks pupil out for having a hooded top on. And they know, of course, that school people that hate school, and there are adults obviously that do not like education for whatever reason, and just adults in general go, oh wow, yeah, let's read that, that's great. And you can see it on social media platforms that follow from it. It is clickbait, and you get a tirade of comments.
The bit that made a big difference for me as we were writing it as well was from the Schools Week perspective, in the years that I'd spent kind of reporting on academy trusts, I was very skeptical often of the idea that autonomy was great because of the lack of accountability, right? So it meant that some people could go off, they were spending money inappropriately, they were making decisions inappropriately, and there wasn't strong enough oversight in some cases, and that failed the young people. So I really thought this book was going to be all about that side of things, tight and loose and earning the autonomy because we don't want bad things to happen. But what David pushes really strongly in this book, and I came to understand through all of our conversations, is it's not just about that. It's the fact that if you just look at it in that way, you miss the fact that there's a really massive benefit that can come from having these tighter structures. There's a really massive benefit that can come from, yes, having autonomy, but with that autonomy, where's your responsibility to use it to improve the other schools? It's not just no one's looking over your shoulder so you can have a whale of a time. It's because you don't have all of these other constraints on you. How are you going to use that time to maybe improve a school that's struggling, or ensure that your staff are trained up even better, or that you're taking on more new staff and training them up and putting them into the system? And in all my years of just shouting about, oh, there's not strong enough oversight, I didn't think that through. And I'm not sure as a newspaper necessarily have pushed that. It's a very difficult and nuanced argument, but really glad that people who are in the system can read this book and think to themselves, yes, my autonomy comes with not just accountability, but responsibility as well.
We also think there are some additional things that we had to, and it was important that we took into consideration. The first one is that I think the curriculum occasionally leads to misconceptions amongst the pupils who study it. Let me give you an example. You could go through a curriculum in a school in England, and you could end up with the misconception that those civilizations that were at the forefront of human endeavor were all white Western ones since the Egyptians, right? Like, you probably did the Egyptians at primary school, and beyond that, you could leave with that misconception. You could leave with the misconception that there weren't black people in England during Tudor times. You could probably leave school with that misconception as well. We just don't think that's good history, right? Like, Christine Counsell is excellent on this. Like, it's the job of a good historian to look at a wide range of sources and to not leave pupils with misconceptions about the past. And actually, there's loads of space in the national curriculum. It actually specifies other civilizations that aren't often as well covered. Kingdom of Benin, for example. We have a unit on the Mali Empire. These are like deliberately included in the curriculum, and they address really important misconceptions, as well as being just like fascinating pieces of history in their own right. Learning about the richest man that ever lived, like that's an important thing for pupils to know and understand.
If anybody was to do a job, whether it be a nightclub bouncer or an accountant, you would expect some kind of training before you were asked to do the job. But only in education do we sit students down and say behave, when that doesn't take into account the fact that so many kids come from circumstances where behave means something very different to them. I mean, to them, behave might mean shout out for attention if you need it, or to somebody else it might be leave the classroom whenever you feel like it, because that's what you're used to. So we're dealing with the habits these kids have already brought to school with them. And if we just assume they've all got the same beliefs, aptitudes, habits, and knowledge and skills about behaviour, then we're guaranteeing that the disadvantage gap will just become wider and wider and wider. So the moral of the story is, if you want kids to behave really well, teach them the behaviour you want to see, as opposed to just telling them the behaviour. Because if you tell somebody, it just goes in one ear and out the other.
So
when you think
another bit of a question: Rose and Shine's principles in action, generative learning in action. Which would win in a fight?
Generative learning would easily win. One, it's a bigger book.
That's true. That is very true.
It is a significantly larger book, so it's got weight on its side, which
and value for money.
It's more value for money. Right. The reason I think it'd win in a fight is, I like this question, is because it punches last. I've got a metaphor here. I've got an analogy. I'm not afraid to use it. All right, buckle in. So, Rose and Shine comes first. The principles of instruction come first, because you have to have those principles of instruction so that pupils have some knowledge with which to generate learning from. So you have to have that. But generative learning has the last punch, because that's then what they do at the end to secure what they've heard. So, I'm a huge fan of explicit instruction. But after that, you say to the kids, okay, now you need to what? Well, a strategy from generative learning is what you then do. You do a mind map, you write a summary, you self-test. So this is the thing that they then do to generate learning from the instruction they've received.
I mean, I'm very much in favour of as high as possible academic standards. Let's stop mucking about with all this sort of grade inflation, and let's be as rigorous as possible. Let's have more Mossborns and Michaelas. Absolutely. But I do also think that School 21 is onto something. What is their motto? I can't remember. It's sort of, they are a kind of head, hand, heart school. We should have the highest possible academic standards, but we should apply those high standards also to what used to be regarded as the softer subjects, creative subjects, the art and music and sport are also, incredibly important things, and more important, as the robots take over more and more of old style work. So, I don't think these things. Superficially, what I'm saying may sound slightly sort of contrary to the kind of E.D. Hirsch sort of Gove analysis, but I'm not. I'm a great fan of that analysis. But I think it's not incompatible with acknowledging a wider spread of human aptitudes and talents, and working on those as hard as we do on biology and French.
I suppose what at the heart of all of this, at the heart of motivation itself, is this issue of perception. In that, a lot of the way a lot of the reasons that we either put in effort and invest attention in things or not are not because necessarily of the reality that we find ourselves in, but how we perceive that reality. And so, past success is a subjective thing, and it depends on, for example, how we have framed success for ourselves in the past. And so two pupils who could have exactly the same experience, one of them could feel that they've been really successful and the other could feel that they've continually failed. And so how we, feedback is a really central vehicle through which we can help pupils to develop more accurate attributions, for example. And so helping them see that they are, not only are they, accurate or inaccurate in a particular example, but that through that feedback that you're helping them to understand that they can do better, I suppose, but also even further than that, they are part of the community.
You make a good point. One of the things that you pull out in the first section of the book is you talk about the tension between cynicism, and nobody really wants cynical teachers sort of muttering and sort of refusing to engage, and then cynicism, and there's skepticism, and you cast skepticism in a much more positive light. Can you say something about that difference between cynicism and skepticism?
Yes. So I suppose it's in a sense a sort of diluted version of a Freire model. When you're trying to get to the heart of a way of working, instead of just being directive and saying, I think this is the way it ought to be, I think it's about opening up conversations about the kind of atmosphere in which we want to have these discussions. And so do we want to be cynical? And I just go into a bit into the history of cynicism, which actually is a quite respectable branch of philosophy. It was on the extremes, like farting and defecating in public. Rationale behind that, but that's not good. But it's somehow...
We've all done it, Mary.
Not since the age of 18 months, I hope.
So I'm interested in one of the things that you said there, and obviously I haven't read the book yet. It's not out yet. I'm looking forward to having a crack at it. But you said there you're trying to move away from the idea that behaviour is communication. Why do you think that's not a particularly helpful message?
I think it's become a cliche which tells us very little about the child and very little about their story. So, and I think any broad brush response means that we aren't really understanding the child. And I think it's that, yes, behaviour is communication. I'm not saying it's not, but it's also part of a system. It's not just a child expressing their thoughts and feelings. It's also an expression of the society they're in, the system they're in, the culture they're in, and so on. And I just think when you say that, I think there's always the worry that it reduces it to not having to deal with it. Oh, they're just trying to tell us they're upset, or they're just trying to tell us there is trauma, or just that. And then we ignore it and don't look at ways of supporting that child to be able to express their needs in a different way. And I think always with cliches, whether or not the cliche is zero tolerance or a restorative practice or whatever it might be, that when we have a catch-all phrase and situation, I think it does little to really unpick some of the difficulties that child has, or that school might have, or that family might have, because I don't want to problematize the child either. I think the child is often has a whole range of different things happening around them.
Rosenstein is not a universal description. It doesn't even set out to be. So I think it's almost defines its own limits. But I still find it's very useful. The thing I find is great about it is that even with those limits, different subject teachers can be talking about questioning and modelling and scaffolding and guided practice to independent practice. I think these phrases are really, really useful, and nearly every subject has its form of them. So I think as long as we're clear that it doesn't apply to all things all the time, and it's how you do it that matters in your context, and we constantly think of it in that way, I think it's a useful way of framing the conversation so that everyone's talking about similar ideas.
Well, there we are. Some of our favourite interviews from some of the different authors that we've interviewed over the past 9 weeks. Who was your favourite, Martin?
Who's my favourite author? You can't even ask me that. I think they're all wonderful. Of course.
Your favourite interview, Martin. Your favourite interview.
Of the people I've interviewed. And again, you see, I mean, as soon as you say who's your favourite, for different reasons at different times,
Come on, gun to your head. Who would you go?
I mean, you can't have favourites, surely.
Oh, come on. I think we were both pretty excited when E.D. Hirsch came on the show, weren't we?
It was a very great honour to talk to E.D. Hirsch, and he said some lovely things about us too. So that's a sort of mutual admiration.
Yeah, I think we've got a clip of him.
We got.
Thank you. And a pleasure for me too. I say I don't get this kind or level of question.
No idea what's.
Well, thank you.
That was lovely, wasn't it?
I couldn't hear that, but I'm sure He was saying some lovely thing. If it's the bit I think it is, then that was a lovely thing.
Yeah,
but there's so much to see. All these people have appeared in every episode, so there's all our other episodes, all 9 of them out there to check up on, to look back over the last few weeks. And also, of course, there's all the interviews, the extended interviews, which you can look at. So it's worth subscribing to make sure you get all the new ones that are going to come up over the rest of the term before Christmas.
It's absolutely worth subscribing. And the other benefit to subscribing to the channel, Martin, is that every week we put, Martin cuts up the names of all the different subscribers and sticks pins. No, he doesn't do that. He puts them into a hat, and they have a chance of winning the book of the week. And before we get to this week's raffle, we've got another interview that we did recently with Lekha Sharma, talking about her book. And I wonder if we can just hear a little bit of her interview talking about the primary curriculum. Welcome to Lekha Sharma, who is the author of Curriculum to Classroom. And we're going to have a little bit of a chat about your book, which it's only been out a few weeks. Am I right there, Lekha?
Yeah, only a few weeks now.
Yeah, and it's been going well. You were telling me you've had some nice feedback from some of the readers who've already encountered it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've heard from lots of people kind of far and wide, which has been hugely flattering and really lovely to receive feedback about people who've read the book and found it a really useful resource. So yeah, really, it's been a really exciting time.
Fabulous. So can you tell us a little bit about the big idea of the book? What sets it apart? Why should people want to read it?
I think as someone who was in my role leading curriculum, I always felt like there was this breadth of information, research, guidance, and I felt like there was so much kind of to really understand and consume, so much information. So I think what this book is all about is making sure that leaders have a kind of prompts, lots of different prompts around thinking about the curriculum. So expert insights, bits of research that are really crucial, whether that's kind of seminal research that's been around for a while or cutting edge research, and just ideas that are practical in the classroom. So bridging that gap between the research, curriculum design, and actually what takes place in the classroom.
Right, okay. And the book's subtitled A Handbook to Prompt Thinking Around Primary Curriculum Design and Delivery. So it's obviously you're a primary specialist. Is it just for primary colleagues, or do you think secondary teachers might also find something of value in that?
I think a lot of the ideas in the book are absolutely applicable to secondary. I think that although the focus is primary, lots of the thinking is generic to curriculum in general or to teaching and learning in general. So I'd like to think that it's something that would be a useful resource for both primary and secondary colleagues.
Towards the end of the book, you talk about some of the hard-won lessons that you've learned from putting in place a new curriculum in a school. Can you talk us through some of the most important lessons that you'd like to pass on to other people doing this work?
Yeah, I think when you are training as a teacher, some of these things around leadership development, and I guess now we're in the very fortunate position in the current kind of educational landscape that we're in, that there are fantastic programs around leadership development. But I guess I'm speaking from experience, and actually those kind of lessons around leadership are probably some of the most important ones that I've kind of shared in the book. But something I would definitely say is a top tip around curriculum design and delivery is just keeping that focus on what it looks like in the classroom. So thinking about how this strategy or a curriculum approach, how it's going to translate to an actual living, breathing classroom with 30 children and one teacher. What is it going to look like? What are the challenges? How is this realistically and practically going to translate into the classroom? And just keeping your teacher hat on, really, because I think as a leader, sometimes it's really easy to lose sight of that. And I think it's really important to just recognize, hold on, with my teacher hat on, what would this mean for me delivering a lesson in the classroom?
Welcome to Lekha Sharma. Oh, There we are. In one of those episodes, Martin, we're going to
have technical issues today. Apparently, can we be heard now? I hope we can, because we apparently couldn't be heard earlier.
No, very frustrating. Somebody's going to get a beating. So
it's lovely to read something on the YouTube chat that Jody has written. This would be great for a staff meeting to pique interest in different areas.
Well, Jody, we'd love you to use this in your staff room if your staff could bear it. Anyway, so Lekha's book is going to be given away. We're going to give away a couple of copies next week. So please subscribe so that you've got to be in it to win it, so to speak. And on that subject, Martin, your hat is brimming with the names of our subscribers. Oh, it doesn't look brimming there. Show us the content. And we're giving away a copy of Catherine Birbalsing's book, The Power of Culture, and also a copy of Sam Strickland's book, Education Exposed 2, In Pursuit of the Halcyon Dream. We haven't got a picture of that because we prefer Catherine's book, I think. I don't know. Anyway, so Martin, who's won The Power of Culture?
Now let's have a quick look. Oh my goodness! Sorry. I picked out 3 at once there.
Oh, Martin.
Clo.
Pardon me?
I don't know who. It says Clo. So new subscriber Clo. I can't read. It's not there. Clo.
Well, I couldn't see that or hear it. But if you are Clo, I think that's what Martin said. You need to get in touch. Email us on hello@itsyourtimeyou'rewasting or something like that. I can't remember our email address, Martin.
.co.uk.
Is it the whole thing? It's your time you're wasting.co.uk. That's ridiculously long.
No, it's wasting.
hello@itswastingyourtime.hello. No, I don't know. Anyway, if you look, get in touch on YouTube if there's a problem. And who's won Sam Strickland's book?
So this is. I haven't got my glasses on. So.
Oh, yeah. Look here. Have mine.
Melissa. We could. No, hang on. The magic.
Oh wow!
The magic of television or whatever it is. Melisande Box.
Melisande Box, brilliant. So, Melisande, again, get in touch however you can. Our incoherent email address is one option, or leave us a message on YouTube, and we'll get in touch and we'll get your book to you. There they are, both side by side. A couple of smashing books. So that's it for episode 10. In our production meeting, we said episode 10, it's going to be flawless. There's going to be no mistakes. And that was a big fat lie, wasn't it, Martin?
Don't blame me. I can assure you. I'm just sitting here watching the chaos ensue.
Oh, dear goodness me. Well, I don't know, probably people at home don't realise how difficult it is to put on a live show. It probably isn't that difficult, but it's a lot more difficult when you're with idiots, frankly.
No. I think it's a very...
you, Martin. I'm not saying you.
Yeah, I didn't even think you meant me.
No, I did mean you.
I was talking about other idiots rather than myself.
Oh, look, go on, talking absolute nonsense for another minute, but let's not.
Look, go onto the YouTube site and have a look around there. Look through our back catalogue. It's some fantastic stuff going on there. Yes, there've been technical issues, but those will be ironed out. We are assured.
Yeah, maybe one day. And yeah, no, absolutely. And I know you've been doing a lot of work, Martin, on cataloguing some of the stuff that's out there on our homepage. And there's just a great deal of high quality footage for our subscribers to get their teeth into. So please feel free to do that. But that's been our 10th episode of It's Your Time You're Wasting. Thanks ever so much for frittering away an hour of your time. And we'll see you again.
We'll see you next Friday, 6 o'clock, after the first week back at school. We'll have some fantastic guests. Is James Mannion?
James Mannion and Kate McAllister are talking about their book, Fear is the Mind Killer. So
Right.
June fans, tune in for that.
And we hope to have some others too who for your delectation, and we'll give a
That would be
list
good.
out.
It could be quite short, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, have a lovely weekend. We'll see you. We'll see you soon. Bye bye.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble